My Ephedra story. I became aware of how good Ephedra was, for energy in particular, when I started making it up as drinks for festivals. And people coming back to me and going, wow, this is fantastic. You know, you feel so good and it's so healthy, and you know, you don't have to take a pill. This is so great, you know. So we started serving up Ephedra, and then we noticed that people who had asthma said that their asthma had disappeared forever, not just temporarily. And then we found that it was especially good for sinus, and I even have some Ephedra here. I mean, I could be arrested for having this last little bit of Ephedra, but I keep this for my partner and myself, who we both occasionally suffer sinus problems, and just by chewing on that much of Ephedra will relieve the sinus. No sinus medication works so well as Ephedra does. The Ephedra is superior to any medication, both for asthma or sinus, and perhaps that's why it's prohibited now. Because at the time it wasn't prohibited. When we first started dealing in Ephedra and getting all this background information and realising how good it was a legal herb in Australia. Then in America they banned that herb, mainly because it was a threat to the pharmaceutical industry profits. They said that 39 young people had died on Ephedra, and we doubted that right from the start. Anyway, after still continuing to use it, because I was like just so enraptured in this herb that I thought whether the law bans it or not, I'm still going to keep it for people who suffer sinus or asthma. And unfortunately I went into Rolling Stone magazine and said that kids are far better off on Ephedra and guarana than taking ecstasy pills. 3 months later we had a big raid by the TGA. That's when I was thrown into jail and fingerprinted. I couldn't believe it. And I remember when they were raiding our shop in Nimbin, they were in plain clothes, some of them, and one drug dealer in Nimbin tapped one of the plainclothes officers on the back and said, "Hey, you want to buy some drugs?" And the officer turned round to him and said, "Hey, you better get out of here. We're after something bigger." And they went away with 3 bags of herbal tea. They went away with this. I went to jail for this. You know, it's just crazy. But nevertheless, the whole herbal industry that was using Ephedra right round the world shuddered when I was arrested, because I was the first one ever arrested, not only in Australia but it seems in America. And the Americans were watching the case very closely, and because of my misfortune they actually sent an investigator in to professionally research the claim that Ephedra killed 39 young people. He went to the FDA, which is the equivalent of our TGA, and they could not find any proof, had nothing to offer him. He spent 6 months on the research, asking all of the people who were involved, where did this information come from? It was invalid. It was concocted. It was a sheer lie. Nobody has ever died from the use of herbal Ephedra. Ephedrine, which is a chemical replica of the herb, can be dangerous. And all pills can be dangerous. They're too easy to take. But nature itself has counterbalancing ingredients or active ingredients that prevent any danger. Besides, if you abuse Ephedra, you'll soon know it. You get a pain in your kidneys. I have abused it. You stop using it, the pain goes away. That's fine. Anyway, I was arrested for Ephedra, and I was charged with the possession and supply of a dangerous drug, namely ephedrine. When I approached court, I went there about 10 times. I had good barristers, etc. In the end, the judge discovered that Ephedra in New South Wales was not banned, but ephedrine, of course, is and should be. And the case was dismissed, and all of the herb, which, as I said, I've got some left now, was returned to me. So that was a victory. We continued to sell it quietly to asthma sufferers and sinus sufferers and hay fever sufferers, and then I had a raid on my Gold Coast stall. But not only did they raid for ephedra, they raided for, would you believe, apricot kernels. Would you believe apricot kernels? Apricot kernels supposedly are toxic, however they're not. Apricot kernels actually are the best thing ever to take for cancer. And they raided for apricot kernels. When I told one lady about this, she said, oh goodness, I'm going to get into trouble. I've got tons of apricot kernels. She owned a fruit and vegetable shop. They also raided for kava, which I'll be talking about in a minute, and they also raided for ephedra. I went to court yet again over ephedra, and this time I wasn't legally represented and I stood my own case. And all fair and square, I won my case after about 5 court appearances, and I won't go into the details, but nevertheless I got a shock when a month later the health department via the TGA appealed the decision. They wanted to retry me. I thought, goodness, these people are so serious. They really do want to oppress herbs. And in the court I stood up and said how good, and why. The judge said, well, why do you sell this herb? And I said, well, it's so magnificent for asthma. It's so healing. It's so good for sinus. It's so good for hay fever. It's so good for energy. And it's also good for weight loss. And I'm committed to it. I think it's a marvellous herb and should not be banned. Or at the very least, it should be able to be prescribed by qualified herbalists and naturopaths. At the moment, it's S4, can only be prescribed by a doctor. However, chemists don't keep the herb. There's no money in herbs, so it's a catch-22 situation. If you could find a good doctor who would prescribe ephedra, where do you then get the ephedra? Because there is none left in Australia. I've only got a handful for my own use, and we'll see after this interview whether I get a raid on my property for the handful of ephedra, and we'll see how serious they are. I think it's a shame. This plant was here and is here on the planet for our benefit and should not be banned.